Albert Einstein said that no problem can be solved from the consciousness that created it. We have to learn to see the world anew. So with that in mind, today we've got a call to action. We have a question for you. And we'd like you to think about this for a minute or talk to somebody close to you. The question is this: how much are your life's decisions constrained by what you're expected to do and when you're expected to do it? Today, we challenge you to change. We challenge you to become an invincible. We want you to go and see the world. Go and find out. Find out for yourself. And we'll see you, the real you, when you return. Now, we know that university is on the map for all of us. And that's probably not something that's going to go away in the near future. So why rush? Why rush towards 3 or 4 more years of compulsory education? Why not something different? Sir Francis Bacon said that in the young person, education was travel. And in the older person, education experience. And since the times of Plato in ancient Greece, since the Renaissance, we've known that real education really does take place outside of the gates. And yet still relatively few people take the risk to make a compulsory travel experience part of their independent learning. It's been said that the older generation can only give 2 gifts to the younger: roots and wings. And yet by institution and convention, we sometimes nail our young people to the floor. What is education? What's education for? And most importantly, who's education for? I think the answers to these 3 questions are clear. Education is lifelong learning. Education must be sustainable. And education must promote peace. Most importantly, education has to be inclusive for all. Now, we're all familiar with the traditional model. School, university, graduate degree,
Cha-ching!
job, retirement, and death. And I hope that we can all agree this is an outdated model, except for perhaps the death part. So how can we encourage a spirit of adventure? How can we encourage exploration, both inner and outer, to become a rule rather than an exception? I really believe that independently traveling alone can reconnect us and help us to empathize with other people. We can come up with sustainable and inspirational solutions for all. In 2012, an estimated 2.5 million young people left the UK to go on independent travel experiences. Of that 2.5 million, 30% travelled alone. Now, 11% of Australians have at least a 1-year travel experience before university. Harvard University, as ever ahead of its time, has been recommending a year out in its letters of admission for over 40 years. And the numbers are growing. From the UK, Canada, the US, countries in Europe, Scandinavia, Australia and New Zealand. And the research coming back is really interesting. Most of the young people do return to formal education, and almost all of them do very well. Perhaps more importantly, becoming closer with other human beings through independent traveling ultimately emphasizes the humanist in us all. The idea of using travel to become culturally competent, to be curious to the ways of others, to help find solutions to problems, to open our minds to different uses of word or language, to genuinely experience the fun and challenge of freedom. This is education. Today we challenge you to be the next group of invincibles. And sometimes such a challenge can be inspired by the words of others. So we've got a few travel stories to whet your appetites. Io sono scozzese. Ho abitato in Italia 10 anni fa. Ho imparato la lingua. E adesso la lingua è sempre con me.
I'm Scottish. I lived in Italy 10 years ago. I learned the language, and the language is always with me.
In my first few months in Malawi in southern Africa, I was lucky enough to be invited to play in a fairly important football match. Of the 22 players playing, my face was the only white one. There was a local crowd of about 6,000 people, all of them, of course, beautiful and brown. As I looked to the other end of the field and the opposition warming up, I could see them bouncing and stretching and moving in time to the chants of the crowd.
Mazungu! Mazungu! Mazungu!
White man, white man, white man. I must admit the fear at that moment made me feel like not playing, and yet 20 minutes later I was playing. Close to the touchline in the crowd, I managed to pull off a good move and a good pass. They cheered.
Mazungu! Mazungu!
In that moment, all cultural barriers came down. Language barriers gone, instead to be replaced by mutual appreciation, a love of sport, and potential friendship. On another occasion, I was alone on a train in southern Japan. As I sat down on the bench, I was startled when a small hand reached through the gap in the chairs to grab my unshaven face. At the end of the hand was a small arm, and attached to the arm, a 2-year-old boy climbed over me and the chair to look in my alien blue eyes. At that moment, I understood the openness and honesty of children, and at the same time, the sometimes closed and conventional nature of adults. His mother was horrified, and so was I. St. Augustine said that the world is a book, and those that don't travel read only one page. The Prophet Muhammad advised, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. Later, Helen Keller said, life is either daring adventure or nothing at all. And Aristotle simply said, adventure is worthwhile. Poetry is another way for us to tell our stories. And here's one on travel and journeys.
The bridge is here.
Walk.
Take your hands.
In your hand. Throw your mind to the edge.
Catch your mind.
Dance your legs.
And cross.
Cross with all your journey.
Your mother's father.
And father's mother.
And mother's father's father's mother. And father's mother's mother's father knew.
Yeah.
And walk.
And walk.
You've come too far to fear further. So, this morning, what does all this mean? Why the challenge to conventional, the status quo of education? Yes, travel helps us to understand. And traveling alone helps us to understand and know ourselves. But it's more than that. We know that the current economic, political, consumerist model creates more hunger, more violence, more poverty. So the stand we're asking you to take is a moral one. Do we really care? I really believe that independently traveling alone can help us to care again. We can become much more than competent tourists who simply see sights. We need to refine some balance. And how is balance possible when every nook and cranny of our busy worlds is filled with computers? We need to disconnect to reconnect. Now, to travel alone and independently takes courage. And we have to address some of the common fears. What about my safety in this dangerous world? What about falling behind the competition? How much does it cost? Yes, the world is a very dangerous place, but surely awareness of this is key. Why should risk or danger stop us from doing anything? We'd never leave the house. Falling behind the competition. What competition? We've heard from many famous TED Talks that the current educational model was designed for a time when people didn't live much beyond 40 years old. You're not part of that paradigm. Take your time. The cost is up to you. But think of it like this. They tell us that a one-year travel experience by an independent traveller costs somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 British pounds. If you can start saving or earning at the beginning of your grade 10 and save or earn £100 a month until the end of your grade 12, you've got that money. Now, our call to travel as education was perhaps epitomised best by the words of Mark Twain when he said this: 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the things you did. So throw off the bowlines. Sail away from the safe harbour. Catch the trade winds in your sails. Explore, dream, and discover. Thank you.